My daughter didn't call me a failure that day by accident. She repeated something she had believed for years. And the truth is, I knew that long before she ever said it out loud. It wasn't hidden. It showed in the way she spoke to me. The way she compared me to people who had never carried the responsibilities I had. For a long time, I told myself it was just influence. That she was young. That she didn't understand where her life actually came from. But after enough time, patterns stop being misunderstandings. They become structure. Everything she had depended on came from me. Tuition. Housing. Stability. Every problem that could have forced her to grow. I removed before she ever felt it. And instead of creating appreciation, it created something else entirely. Expectation. The kind that replaces reality with illusion. Because when someone never experiences consequences, they stop recognizing the source of what they have. That was the part I understood too late. I wasn't being overlooked. I was being erased from the equation entirely. Not because I lacked value, but because I made everything work so smoothly that my presence no longer felt necessary. And once I saw that clearly, the situation stopped being emotional. It became structural. Because if I was the one holding everything together, then there was only one question left that mattered. Not how to fix it, but what would happen if I stopped. It wasn't just her. That was the mistake I made for years. Thinking this was about a single relationship I could fix if I tried hard enough. It wasn't. It was a system. My ex-husband contributed almost nothing, yet somehow positioned himself as the stable parent. His wife built an image of success using resources she never had to earn. And my daughter lived inside that version of reality, believing it was complete. Because I was quietly maintaining everything underneath it. I wasn't part of their world. I was the structure holding it up. And the more consistently I gave, the less visible I became. Over time, that invisibility turned into something else. Not absence, but replacement. I wasn't seen as the source anymore. Just the obligation. The person who was supposed to provide without being acknowledged for it. For a long time, I tried to correct that. Conversations. Explanations. Small attempts to make her understand where things actually came from. None of it worked. Because understanding only matters when someone is forced to face reality. And she never was. I made sure of that. Every bill she didn't see. Every problem she never had to solve. Every consequence that disappeared before it reached her. I removed all of it. And in doing that, I created the exact environment that allowed this to happen. If you realized you were the one holding everything together, would you keep supporting them or step back and see what happens? Comment your move? That was when the question stopped being emotional. It wasn't about whether they appreciated me anymore. It was about structure. What happens to a system when the one thing it depends on disappears? Not slowly. Not partially. Completely. And once I asked that question seriously, there was only one way to find out. The decision didn't happen after that conversation. It only looked that way from the outside. By the time she said those words, I had already been watching the pattern for months, tracking everything quietly. Not just what I paid, but what would happen if I didn't. Tuition deadlines, monthly expenses, recurring payments that kept their version of stability intact. I needed to understand the system completely before I removed myself from it. Because removing support without understanding the structure doesn't create clarity. It creates chaos. And chaos can be blamed on anything. I didn't want that. I wanted something precise. Something undeniable. So I started thinking differently. Not as a parent trying to fix behavior, but as someone analyzing a system that had been running without interruption for years. What parts depended on me directly? What parts only appeared stable because I was compensating behind the scenes? And most importantly, how long could everything continue if I stopped? The answers were clearer than I expected. Not long. Not at all. What they believed was stability wasn't distributed. It was centralized. Everything led back to me. Even if they didn't see it. That was the weakness. But timing mattered. Acting immediately after being disrespected would have turned it into emotion, a reaction, something they could dismiss or argue against. I needed them to feel secure first, to believe that nothing had changed, that I would continue being exactly what I had always been: reliable, predictable, permanent, because certainty removes preparation, and people who don't prepare don't adapt quickly when things shift. So I waited. I paid what needed to be paid. I let everything continue as if nothing had changed, until the moment where their dependence was complete and invisible to them. And once that point was reached, there was nothing left to consider. Only execution. I didn't argue after that. I didn't bring it up again. And I didn't try to correct her. Because by that point, there was nothing left to explain. The system was already clear. All that remained was execution. And execution only works when it's done without warning. Gradual change gives people time to adjust. Time to shift responsibility. To find alternatives. To protect themselves. I didn't want adjustment. I wanted clarity. So I removed everything at once. The credit card stopped working first. Not declined randomly, but completely shut down. Tuition payments didn't go through. The account that had always covered everything was no longer there. And the car she drove every day was gone before she even realized something was wrong. Not taken out of anger. Reclaimed. Because it had never actually been hers. None of it had. That was the part she never understood. I didn't send a message. I didn't make a call. I didn't explain what I was doing. Because explanation creates negotiation. And there was nothing left to negotiate. For the first time in years, every problem reached her directly. No buffer. No silent correction happening in the background. No one stepping in before consequences appeared. Just reality. Exactly as it was without me holding it together. From the outside, it probably looked sudden. Like something broke overnight. But nothing broke. It had always been like this. The only difference was that I stopped maintaining it. And when a system depends entirely on one condition, removing that condition doesn't weaken it. It erases it. The reactions came exactly the way I expected them to. Systems like that don't fail quietly. At first, it was confusion. Small things that didn't make sense. Payments that should have gone through but didn't. Access that had always been there, suddenly gone. It felt like a mistake. Something temporary that could be fixed with a call. That was the assumption. That I would step back in and restore everything the way I always had. But I didn't. And that was when confusion turned into urgency. The calls started coming in. Questions first. Then demands. Then something closer to panic. Because for the first time, there was no immediate solution. No backup. No one silently correcting the problem before it became visible. My daughter didn't understand what was happening. From her perspective, things were supposed to work. They always had. My ex-husband tried to reassert control, but there was nothing for him to control. The structure he relied on wasn't his. It had never been. And without it, everything he presented as stability started to collapse. His wife tried to maintain the image. The appearance of normal, but an image without support doesn't last. It fractures quickly, especially when the reality underneath it starts to show. And for the first time, they were all dealing with something they had never had to face before. Consequences that couldn't be redirected. Problems that couldn't be passed on to someone else. That was the moment everything became clear. Not just to me, but to them. Because losing support is one thing. Realizing your entire life only worked because someone else was holding it together is something else entirely. And once that realization happens, there's no way to go back to believing it was ever stable in the first place. By the time everything settled, there was nothing left to explain. That was the part they struggled with the most. They kept looking for a conversation. Some version of this that could be fixed if they said the right thing. But this was never about words. It was about structure. And once a structure, you don't rebuild it by talking about it. You rebuild it by understanding why it failed in the first place. I didn't become powerful the moment I cut them off. I had always been the one holding everything together. That was the part they never saw. Because power doesn't always look like control. Sometimes it looks like support. Quiet. Consistent. Invisible support that makes everything else appear stable. And when something works long enough, people stop questioning what's keeping it working. They assume it's permanent. That was their mistake. I didn't take anything from them. I didn't destroy something that could stand on its own. I removed one condition. And once that condition was gone, everything that depended on it disappeared with it. Not because I forced it to fail, but because it was never built to survive without me. That's the difference they had to face. Not that I changed, but that I stopped. And once you understand that, there's no version of this where things go back to what they were before. So be honest, is this justice? Or did she let them depend on her just to prove they couldn't survive without her? And would you have done the same? Drop your answer below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications.